Did Jesus really call a woman a dog? Sounds harsh, right? Imagine hearing that the mercy you desperately need is not meant for you because of who you are, where you come from, or the mistakes you've made. How would you respond? Would you walk away, head hung low? Or would you find a way to challenge the very idea that some people are excluded from grace? If you've read the Gospels, you know that Jesus is all about love, compassion, and healing. But there's one story where it seems like he calls a woman a dog. It's a moment in the Bible that has sparked a lot of debates. Today, we're diving into this controversial conversation between Jesus and a woman in need of help. So, what's really going on here? What's happening in this controversial Bible moment? And what can we learn from it today? In the dusty, sun-baked town of Tyre and Sidon, far from the well-worn paths of Judea, a woman approached a crowd gathered around Jesus. She was a Gentile, a Canaanite woman, despised by many for her heritage and marginalized for her race. The people in her village and even many of the Israelites saw her as less than human, a person outside the grace of God. But she had heard of a man who healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and spoke of a kingdom unlike any she had ever imagined. Hope had sparked in her heart. Her daughter was tormented by a demon, and in desperation she sought Jesus. She had no illusions of her worth, but if there was a chance, just a chance, that this man could help, she would take it. "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David," she cried, pushing through the crowd to reach him. The disciples, who had followed Jesus for some time, looked at her with distaste. They were uncomfortable with her presence and with her pleading. This woman, this dog in their eyes, was an outsider, and they couldn't fathom why Jesus would give her the time of day. At first, Jesus completely ignores her. He doesn't even acknowledge her request. Now we might wonder, why is Jesus being so silent? Is he ignoring her because she's a Gentile, or is there a bigger lesson in play? The silence between them hung heavy in the air, a tension that felt like a door closed tight. Then, breaking the stillness, he spoke, his voice soft but sharp. "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Wait, what? That doesn't sound like the Jesus we know. So, was it a slip-up? A metaphor or something deeper? Let's take a closer look. The words hung in the air like a challenge. And in that moment, the crowd, the disciples, and even the woman herself must have felt the sting. Jesus, in speaking this way, had called her a dog, a derogatory term used by Jews of that time to describe Gentiles, emphasizing their difference and perceived inferiority, implying that they were unworthy of God's promises. In Jewish culture, dogs weren't cute pets like we think of today. They were often seen as scavengers, unclean animals. So when Jesus says this, it's important to understand the cultural dynamics at play. But something extraordinary happened next. Rather than turning away in shame as most would have, the woman's face remained resolute, her eyes meeting his. There was no resentment, no bitterness. Instead, she saw the opportunity for something greater. In her heart, she understood that this was not an insult, but an invitation to something deeper, an opportunity to challenge the prejudices that stood between her and the mercy of God. "Yes, Lord," she replied, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Her words were not an argument. They were a confession of faith. She did not deny her lowly status in the eyes of society, but she grasped the truth that even the smallest morsel of God's grace was more than enough to bring healing and hope. She understood that God's mercy was not reserved for the powerful or the privileged, but was for the broken, the humble, the outsiders, and those who dared to ask. Jesus looked at her, his heart moved by her response. She had reframed the question, not with defiance but with faith. She understood that God's love was not limited by boundaries of race, history, or religion. She had broken through the walls of prejudice that confined both her and his followers. "Oh, woman, great is your faith," Jesus exclaimed. "Let it be done for you as you desire." And at that moment, her daughter was healed. But more than the healing of her daughter, more than the miracle of physical restoration, something greater had occurred. The woman had opened a door. Jesus, in this moment, had shattered the wall of prejudice that had separated Jew from Gentile, insiders from outsiders, the privileged from the marginalized. By responding to her with grace and mercy, he demonstrated that God's love was boundless, inclusive, and far more expansive than anyone had imagined. In calling her a dog, Jesus was not merely labeling her. He was drawing attention to the very mindset that divided Jews from Gentiles, the assumption that one group was inherently superior to the other. In the context of the conversation, this statement was designed to expose the prejudices that clouded the disciples' understanding of God's mercy. It was almost as if Jesus was asking, "What will you do with this stereotype? Will you accept it as truth, or will you challenge it?" Jesus' approach in calling out the stereotype, by initially referring to the woman as a dog, was not meant to insult or degrade her. Rather, it was a deliberate, thought-provoking act designed to challenge his culture to confront deeply ingrained prejudices and to reframe their understanding of God's mercy. He used the opportunity to confront the entire cultural mindset that separated the righteous from the unrighteous, the chosen from the outcasts. He turned the tables on the stereotype of dogs and used the woman's faith to break down the walls of exclusion. His words and actions here set the stage for the radical inclusivity of his message. God's love does not discriminate. He did it to expose the lie, to shine light on the darkness of the stereotype, the prejudice. But he mainly did it to highlight the true nature of God, and to leave no doubt that despite who you are, where you are from, where you were born, your status in life, God sees you, and he cares. You are his, and he is for you. In doing this, Jesus was not just expanding the woman's access to mercy. He was using her response to break down the walls of prejudice within his disciples. His teaching moments were not always gentle or comfortable, but they were always aimed at helping people see beyond their narrow views. Through this exchange, he revealed that God's mercy was not a commodity reserved only for those who fit into the acceptable categories of religious, racial, or social status. His grace was for all people, every race, every background, every sinner who would humbly ask for it. By confronting the stereotype head-on, Jesus exposed the fragility of the division between Jews and Gentiles. He invited his followers to reframe their understanding of who was worthy of God's grace. It was no longer about adhering to religious laws or social distinctions. It was about faith in God's goodness and willingness to extend mercy. Through his intentional challenge, Jesus demonstrated that the kingdom of God was about who was willing to believe, to humble themselves, and to seek his mercy. The woman's encounter with Jesus was a paradigm shift, a moment where he not only healed but also revealed the depth and breadth of God's love, which could not be constrained by human prejudice. The disciples, watching this unfold, could not help but rethink their understanding of mercy. For years they had believed that God's love was something to be earned, something for the righteous, the clean, and the chosen. But now they saw that mercy was far broader, more inclusive, and more generous than they had ever imagined. As the woman left her daughter healed, she carried with her not just the gift of physical restoration, but the eternal gift of knowing that she was seen, heard, and loved by God, just as she was. Her faith had broken through the barriers of race, religion, and history, and in doing so, she had become an example to all who would listen of how God's grace knows no bounds. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored this powerful and thought-provoking story. Your time and engagement are truly appreciated, and we hope that you found new insights and a deeper understanding of God's boundless mercy. We'd love to have you join us again next week as we dive into another controversial Bible story, one that challenges, inspires, and opens our eyes to God's incredible love in unexpected ways. We can't wait to continue this journey of discovery with you. Until then, may you walk in the fullness of God's grace and understanding.